Hi everyone, this is Ricki Spencer and welcome to another episode of Quest by Community. Today we have a very important guests who are with us, and we're going to be talking about roads to reconciliation. What does that mean? And how we as a community across Australia can make a change. We have three community fellows who are going to be with us today and give us some wonderful insights, and we'll have a really rich conversation that everyone will just be really excited to become involved in this project. And we have with us today Professor Andrew Gunston, who is the Research Associate Deputy Vice Chancellor for Federation University. With us, we have Maria Dimopoulos, I probably didn't pronounce that correctly, AM, who is a community lawyer, activist, and lead change leader. And we also have Husna Amani, who is a leading social work student about to graduate soon, who is also a fellow and who is making headways in the areas of social change and disability. Andrew, let's begin with you. And before we begin the question, let's get our audience to get to know a little bit about you again, and then answer the question, can you provide an overview of the Roads to Reconciliation Activating Multicultural Victoria project?
Thanks very much, Ricki. It's a real delight to be here. I'd like to begin by acknowledging traditional owners of the lands that I'm speaking from, the Wurundjeri peoples of the Kulin Nation, and pay respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So, Ricki, last year, just a bit about myself. As you said, I'm Associate Deputy Vice Chancellor for Reconciliation at Federation University, and I founded and I'm the Director of the National Centre for Reconciliation, Truth and Justice, which is the leading academic think tank in the country on reconciliation, and also have the honour of being co-chair of Reconciliation Victoria. So about June last year, Ricki, I was approached by two amazing leaders in multicultural communities, Maria Dimopoulos AM and Shankar Kasynathan, who approached me about an idea they'd had about putting together a project on engaging multicultural communities in reconciliation. And I want to really pay tribute here to a really close friend of Maria's and mine, Dr. Jackie Huggins AM, who is one of Australia's leading Indigenous leaders in reconciliation over many, many decades. And Dr. Huggins has been speaking to Maria about this idea and suggested that Maria approach me and said, I reckon Andrew and you would be really interested in working together on this project. And of course, as with most things, Ricki, that Maria and I and Shankar have had a really interesting project we've done for the last year. And so I really want to recognise Jackie's contribution to that. So the idea of the project really is to engage multicultural communities in the reconciliation movement. Generally, what's happened in reconciliation over the last 25, 30 years is there's often been positioned, as Noel Pearson talks about, as a bit of a dichotomy between Indigenous peoples and non-Indigenous peoples from an English origin. But it's really important to note that there's 48% of all Australians have at least one parent who was born overseas. And so multicultural communities are really significant in this country. And so we really have to ensure that multicultural communities are engaged in the reconciliation movement as well. And certainly the work that many of us did last year on the referendum, and you can really see the importance of the engaging with multicultural communities in the Voice referendum and reconciliation. So the idea behind the project was to look at ways that the team could engage with Multicultural Victoria on trying to get the communities more engaged in reconciliation, truth and justice in this state.
Thank you for that, Andrew. Maria, now we'll bring you into the space. Tell us a little bit about your journey. What sort of drove you to become involved and take up this very important challenge?
Ricki, thank you for that. If I too could start by acknowledging that as a migrant to this country, it sadly took my first year of law school at Monash University to be confronted by the fact that I had been fed a series of lies about the history of this country. And so it has become a very big part of my dedication and commitment to recognise what I call unfinished business, between those of us who are racialised settlers to this country and the First Nations people of this land. So I suppose as a migrant, recognising that process or journey of so desperately wanting to belong was always going to be at the expense of the dispossession, the violent dispossession of First Nations people. And that was a question that I think continued to persist for me, is what would it look like for those of us who were newly arrived or more established in this country to actually recognise the importance of First Nations histories, of their wisdoms, and what would this country look like if we centred conversations about settlement with First Nations histories at the absolute heart of this. So as I say, it's part of my lifelong commitment as a migrant to this country. I have a law degree. I understand what human rights look like, but I'm incredibly frustrated by the idea that multicultural communities don't understand this incredible rich history, don't appreciate that we are living on lands where they've been violently torn away from First Nations people, don't necessarily appreciate the project of colonisation and the fact that colonisation continues, and that sadly, that as migrants to this country, we too participate in that ongoing dispossession of land and its effect on First Nations people. So my interest, my lifelong passion around this very much was bound up with the work of amazing people like Professor Huggins, Jackie Huggins, as mentioned, Dr. Aileen Morton Robinson, so many other First Nations leaders who've talked about this for a very, very long time. I suppose the opportunity to become the Deputy Chair of the Victorian Multicultural Commission and meet the amazing Shankar Kasynathan, where we continue to talk about the fact that feedback from our communities continue to suggest that multicultural communities were desperate for this information, that they saw an alignment with their own histories, perhaps of colonisation in their respective countries of origin, but just didn't know what to do with that, where to go, who to talk to. Some were even under, I would say, the myth sort of apprehension or the idea that they'd never met a First Nations person. So all of these kinds of gaps in knowledge and information in multicultural communities really led to Shankar and I having these conversations with Andrew Gunston and saying, how might we formulate a meaningful project, a project that actually engages in a way that sometimes might mean uncomfortable conversations, but in a way that engages multicultural communities in all their diversity through an intersectional lens and really starts to envisage this idea of what would solidarity look like between racialised settlers and First Nations people of this country. Could you imagine the potential? And that's exactly what this project has given birth to. A group of amazing fellows who have had these conversations with their communities and are now going to progress that conversation beyond this, Ricki. I think that's what's so exciting, that while I think these conversations aren't necessarily new, what is exciting and what is innovative is the way that we have grounded this in place-based conversations, connected local communities, connected local governments and other ethnic communities, councils across the state, particularly in regional Victoria, where we know these conversations are desperately needed, that this project was able to capitalise on so much good work that's happening out there and really draw in grassroots communities as part of the building towards civic literacy while centering First Nations histories, wisdoms, and knowledge at the heart of our work.
Thank you for that. And now it's over to Hasna Amani, who's an emerging social worker in the community. Tell us your story. What got you inspired to become involved in this very important project?
Yeah, thank you, Ricki. So I was approached by Maria to be part of this project. And I, for context, have done work within the multicultural space, which I'm still involved in, and also in the disability space. I also just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that I am on Wurundjeri land, and that I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And this was, always will be, stolen Aboriginal land, and settler colonialism is still ongoing to this day, in Australia and in different parts of the world as well. And so, with my experience growing up, learning about the history of Australia, it was very whitewashed, looking at the experiences of white colonizers, which was in primary school. It wasn't that much better, I would say, in secondary education. Um, but when I got to sort of the end of my studies in secondary school, it got a little bit better, but also because I was doing Australian history, and there are specific topics that needed to be covered as well. We didn't have the opportunity to spend specific time on that, on the experiences of Aboriginal people and colonization, and the impacts that it is having till this day. And it wasn't until university, I guess, that I really got the opportunity to dive into that topic more and really explore and dissect the experiences. And I guess that's when I also started linking things back to the experiences of people from specific cultural backgrounds who may have experienced similar things in terms of settler violence, or colonialism, and dispossession of land. And I feel like it is an experience that people in the multicultural space can relate to, because of their own experiences. But it is about providing the information to them about the history of Australia, and the real history of Australia, not what was fed to us, and probably in some parts of the country probably is still being emphasized. But yeah, the real sort of truth and the impact of what is being experienced to this day, with relation to the community. And I do a lot of work within the racial justice space. And yeah, we see a lot of young people from multicultural background who are people of color, actively taking a stand in relation to a lot of issues affecting people of color, but also issues around First Nations communities, and activism, and amplifying their experiences, and the looking at sort of things in a social justice lens. And these people, like, we are from multicultural communities, and I see that within the younger generation there is a really keen sort of interest to look at and to really understand and advocate alongside First Nations communities, and build that sort of knowledge of what historically has happened, and the injustice that is still having far-reaching impacts to this day.
Hasna, as you were speaking, I want to ask you just one follow-up question before we go to the next series of questions, and that is, your recent experience in high school,
Yep.
when you were learning about First Nation cultures and ways of knowing, did you feel you had enough exposure and understanding to First Nations ways of knowing? And I mean by that, by having people like from the community, like elders, to come into your classroom and speak.
No, we didn't have that, unfortunately, and we didn't have the learnings, I guess, of you know, Aboriginal and First Nations culture. It was more looking at the impact of colonization and what had happened historically, um, in terms of what we were taught, which I guess is a bit of a wider discussion around how the curriculum is structured, but I won't get into that at the moment.
Thank you for that. Andrew, I just want to, as a slight follow on to that, before we go to the next question. Andrew, we've had this conversation before. What, with your expertise in the area of education and learnings, why do you think that we still have not embraced the idea of having, local elders and communities come into schools to really give that rich living experience? And do you think something like that would help young students and even the teachers, school community to understand our living experiences of country and ways of being?
Yeah, thanks, Ricki. And certainly the work that a few of us have been doing since the referendum and looking at the referendum results clearly shows that we really struggle in this country in regards to truth telling and education. I mean, the way so many people believed some of the outrageous lies from the No campaign last year shows how little the general community understands Indigenous issues, which is really concerning. And certainly, I don't think a lot's changed, to be honest, from when I went to school, when the only things I learned about Australia were Ned Kelly, Farlap, Don Bradman, and Captain Cook. And my kids have been going through the schooling system and they're not learning a lot more. So we've got a lot of work to do. I know there's certainly some amazing work being done at a number of universities in engaging with Indigenous education, which is fantastic. But still, there's too many universities that are not doing this enough in the teacher education space. So a lot of teachers are coming out into the schooling system who haven't actually got much understanding at all on Indigenous education. And so there's a real concern, I think, certainly the media and the education systems are areas that we have to improve a lot in this country in terms of doing truth telling. And so certainly in Victoria, which we've got the amazing work the Adjunct Justice Commission being done at the moment, which is Australia's first truth telling commission. That's fantastic, and that's a really important critical work. But that needs to be supported by improvements in our education and media systems to ensure that all of us non-Indigenous people have a much better understanding on the true history of this country and the importance of First Nations rights and First Nations knowledges and critical areas as well. So hopefully, Ricki, will see as we progress towards a treaty that we'll start to see some improvements in the education system in that regard.
Okay. Maria, I wanted to ask you now, as a follow on to that, what Andrew just mentioned, why is it important for, say, newly arrived migrants coming into this country, refugees coming in and resettling here, and even those who've been here for many generations, that we need to have more conversations about the what's happened in terms of First Nations peoples across the decades, that
Yeah.
these conversations?
Ricki, I think there's a lot of reasons why members of our diverse multicultural communities need to really engage with truth telling, with greater understanding of the history of this country, and a recognition of the tension that's inherent in this idea of multiculturalism. Because it has to be remembered, I think, first and foremost, that this is a country without a treaty, one of the very few countries that has yet to sign a treaty with First Nations people, that sadly it's also predicated on a history of violence. And that unless we really grapple with that first and foremost, that what can sometimes be considered a very progressive policy like multiculturalism, we fail to understand how multiculturalism has also served whiteness in its dispossessions of First Peoples. I think that's the tension. And that's always been a tension for me, that ironically, the sort of belonging that I yearned for growing up when I was being subjected to racism. I'm an older person. Obviously, I was part of the first, migration in terms of Italians and Greeks and Macedonians and others. That while I struggled with my identity, while I struggled to understand racism in this country, that it took me many years later to realise that despite that, as a racialised other, I was still prioritised in terms of that hierarchy of oppression that operates, that First Nations people were still effectively being denied their rightful place in this country. So that is a tension and a dilemma, I think, for multicultural communities. And while I recognise that over the many years that I've been an activist in this space, I recognise what people have said to me, that there's an alignment. We understand how First Nations people feel as migrants to this country. We too have been subjected to the ongoing racism. Nonetheless, the message I think that we've really now tried to cultivate in a project like Roads to Reconciliation is that there's absolute alignment here. There's no doubt about grounds for solidarity in our efforts here with First Nations people. But that centering of that epistemology, if you like, Ricki, you talked about Indigenous worldviews, that centering of First Nations epistemologies, that centering of First Nations truth is absolutely vital then to any work that we might do around anti-racism. So that's been a real message. But Shankar and I have always kind of used this line in some of the workshops that we've run, workshops that are based on getting to understand how that extraordinary history of advocacy, whether it's Mabo, or it's been the history around the freedom rides in this country, the extraordinary resistance that First Nations people have demonstrated throughout the history of colonisation in this country, that by tapping into that history, by understanding some of those strategies, by really appreciating the sophistication of those advocacy campaigns, that we can actually tap into some of that and build resistance around racism in this country. And so we've used this great quote, Shankar and I, in all of our workshops. And if I could quote Lila Watson, you may have come across this quote, but we love it. If you come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you've come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. And what we know as a result of this project, because we've done evaluations along the way, we've undertaken post workshop surveys. The feedback consistently has been is that we now appreciate the common ground that exists, but we also appreciate the very unique place that First Peoples have in this country. And so I would say that as a result of this project, not only have we enhanced an appreciation and understanding of that history of advocacy, but we've also really built a way forward for meaningful engagement with the First Peoples of this land. And that has to be grounded in a place of accountability. And I'm really heartened that some of our fellows have reported back that while some in their communities have been resistant to this, they've now sort of come to really appreciate that genuine reconciliation also involves an understanding of what your place in terms of that accountability to First Nations people looks like. So great outcomes in my view, a terrific commitment to reconciliation and self-determination, but of course a tiny, tiny drop in the ocean, Ricki. We've got so much work to do in this country. So I'm hoping that this program, a project, will continue to be supported by governments, by institutions like the National Centre for Reconciliation, but more than that, by our multicultural communities as a whole.
Andrew, I want to now take it to you to ask with this question: how are Indigenous perspectives and voices incorporated into the project's activities?
Thanks, Ricki. Well, just wanted to recognise the invaluable work of one of the centre's staff in this. Jessie Flay is a Noongar man from West Australia, and Jessie's been instrumental in a lot of the work that we've been doing. So one of the things we did do, Ricki, was we took all the community fellows on a on country experience down to Budgeon Bim, down near Portland, Victoria, and really honoured that Jessie could come along to that. And so what we tried to do, sort of taking one step back, Ricki, is we tried to give the community fellows, of which Husna is one of 10 amazing fellows drawn from a whole range of different community groups from across metropolitan and regional Victoria. We tried to give the fellows a range of different experiences. So, for example, we were really privileged to have Commissioner Sue-Ann Hunter, who's the co-deputy chair of the Europe Justice Commission, do a wonderful presentation on the importance of truth telling and truth listening. And I think that was really really impactful on the fellows about the importance of truth in education. We're honoured to meet with Reconciliation Victoria and its CEO, Nicole Finlay, to have a fantastic discussion about the importance of reconciliation. And we heard from multicultural community leaders then who are working in the reconciliation space. And as I said, we're really honoured to go down to Budgeon Bim to talk to traditional owners down there about the extraordinary traditional knowledges and the histories of Budgeon Bim, which, as you recall, Ricki, there's fish traps and stone houses that are older than the pyramids there. So it's an extraordinary recognition of the longevity of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture, which, as we know, is the longest continuing culture on the face of this planet. So, yeah, again, as I mentioned before, Jessie Flay has done some great work working with the fellows to engage them with the importance of First Nations knowledges. And also just wanted to reiterate what Maria said. The importance in this project is really looking at a strength-based approach. So many organisations with their reconciliation action plans and their engagements often operate under a deficit approach, which I've been very critical, and I call that performative reconciliation. But the real strength of this project is we've really recognised the importance of First Nations-led initiatives and strength-based approaches. So this is a really strength-based approach that we're working with our community fellows. And also acknowledge what Maria said. This has been a brilliant inaugural year, but we've only been able to reach 10 community fellows at the moment. So, and a certain number of local government councils, but we've really got a lot of work still ahead of us to reach the rest of the local government councils in not just Victoria but Australia, and to reach out to more multicultural community groups, which we see is really critical for advancing this project.
I want to now ask Husna, how did your life change becoming a community fellow, and what surprised you the most when you started to undertake this important work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess finding, a space where there were, people within, from different communities, obviously, but like within the multicultural space who also were, interested in bringing the experiences and helping, their communities to better understand, the experiences of dispossession and settler colonial violence and the history that is, again, I keep mentioning this, still, impacting so-called Australia to this day. And also just hearing, other people's experiences from, their own backgrounds, and just linking it back to their, experiences of what has been going on in their home countries and sort of looking at the links, between those experiences historically and, the experiences of Indigenous communities in Australia. But one thing that I was also surprised at is, when hearing from the different people who we had the privilege of getting to meet throughout this fellowship, there was a big emphasis on community, and the people around you, and passing on stories to the younger generation. And that is a big thing that I have seen, which is present within different multicultural communities as well. And I just think that's really powerful and really, beautiful. And just to see that shared aspect of culture, present within both the multicultural and Indigenous communities.
Thank you for sharing that. I want to now go to you, Maria, and I want if you could share any success story with our audience, or milestones that this wonderful project has so far achieved.
There are so many examples I could cite. Honestly, over the last 12 months, there have been terrific examples of people really engaging in deep listening, building long term relationships with local community elders. I think they're the kinds of things that we know suggest that this is not a flash in the pan project. It can't be. We realise that the only way forward is to build authentic, genuine relationships between groups. That's why we really did not see this as a 1 year pilot program. We see this as a lifelong commitment and journey. Ideally, it would be great to have it resourced and supported, but ultimately, this goes beyond a funded Victorian government program. This has to be embedded in everything that we do at that grassroots level and at the institutional level. Some great examples, though, I think, are where people attended some of the workshops, particularly by our fellows. I mean, I recall, Andrew, we attended the Sikh temple where there were over 150 members of the Sikh community. And at the end of the presentation by one of our fellows, a number of Sikhs came up and said, "We get colonisation. We understand its painful impact, but we've never really understood how that connects us to the people of the First Peoples of this land." And were so tearful about the fact that they'd been denied information about the country that they had migrated to or fled to as refugees. There are other examples of, I think about, if I could use this quote, I actually noted it down for myself, of a fellow who was really resistant to the idea that he needed to understand this history. He wasn't part of the problem. He kept saying, "I didn't create this problem. Why should I be made to feel responsible or accountable?" But ended up saying in his evaluation, "We came here for a better future for our children. But now I realise that this cannot be possible if we turn away from the discrimination and injustice that Aboriginal people I now understand are subjected to. I'm going to go now to my communities and my families and say, we cannot be silent on this when it's the very thing that we tried to escape from in our own country." This statement reflects so many more, Ricki, that I could share with you in the evaluation forms, the surveys, but the conversations that we had on the ground, the conversations we know will continue. But I think that what's really beautiful about this is that we are in the process of preparing our communities around treaty and what that looks like, trying to directly challenge the misinformation that was out there during the referendum, and having people say, "When's the next program? I want to be a fellow now. This looks terrific. So, wow, success in my view is those conversations, that feedback that we get directly from the communities. And ultimately, if this can make a difference to the way that this country's future trajectory looks like, then count me in.
Over to you, Andrew, because we've got a lot of people are listening and they're thinking, you know what, I really want to become involved and I really want to make a change. But can you give us a bit of a snapshot to where this project is at?
Sure. And Ricki, if I just might digress a bit, I just wanted to just follow on from what Marie was saying. To me, from personally, there's been a number of amazing highlights to this. As I said, the workshops that we held with the fellows were fantastic, and Commissioner Sue-Ann Hunter and Reconciliation Victoria and all the amazing Indigenous leaders that we talk with were just extremely inspiring, and that was fantastic. Marie and Shankar also, Ricki, did a number of amazing workshops with a number of local local government councils in metropolitan Melbourne and also in regional Victoria. And I was really privileged to go along to that and sort of help contribute in regards to talking about some of the examples from First Nations history in regards to resilience and activism. But certainly, I found those workshops remarkable in how local communities and local government councils engaged with this process. So that's been really exciting. And then at the end of the project, it's just been remarkable. I'm sure Maria and Shankar would agree with this as well, that just having the privilege of going to a number of the community fellows events. So the way the project worked, Ricki, was after several months of doing workshops and engaging with First Nations leaders and with us on the project, the fellows then went out and organised events within their own communities. And Marie just mentioned one with the local Sikh community, but we had a number of other amazing events as well. I certainly learned a huge amount there, and they were extremely inspiring. They're all very diverse in what their projects did. But they were all remarkable in their commitment and the community's commitment as well. So that was remarkable to see. In terms of where we go forward, certainly we're really keen for people to engage with us, and so I think we can put some information up at the end of the program about how they can get in contact with the National Centre, and we can start working with different communities as well, because we're very keen to continue this work. Not just within Victoria, but within Australia as well. So Maria and I had some great discussions with Reconciliation Australia. They're very keen to look at this project on a national level as well, because there isn't anything like this before. As I said, it's often been positioned as reconciliation between non-Indigenous people from English origin and Indigenous peoples, but we recognise we're in a very multicultural community. We need to look at this as well. From a personal level, Ricki, I spoke at about 80 or 90 events last year in support of The Voice, and by far and away the best events I spoke at were those run by multicultural communities, because there was just so much more support there than in many other communities that I spoke at. So this is a really key lesson from the referendum about the importance for the reconciliation movement. And as I mentioned earlier, I co-chair Reconciliation Victoria. It's an important lesson from the referendum to broaden our reconciliation movement to incorporate different groups, including regional and rural Australia, but also from including multicultural communities. So this project, I think, is a great way for that broader reconciliation movement to engage more with multicultural Australians.
Thank you. I wanted to ask a question. I'm somebody, as you may know, living with a number of disabilities. How has your experience, and can you enlighten our listeners for people who may be living with disabilities, can they attend events that are hosted and be involved?
Yes, thank you for that. I have a lot of thoughts on this topic, which I have spoken to Maria about. But just before answering that question, I did just also want to mention that I think a lot of the time, with the result of like votes taking place and whatnot, generally speaking, a lot of people think that's sort of where the work is done, dusted. But the reality is that you still need to show up and do the work in whatever way that might look like. And in terms of being someone who also has a disability and showing up and what that might look like, that has that has been something that I have personally struggled with a lot, especially, when it comes to things like, protests that I might want to attend. But what I have heard from other people in the disability community, and obviously this does depend like person by person, um, is that there are certain aspects of things like rallies or protests that can be accessible. Um, I had an auntie of mine actually, suggest to me that um, when it comes to sort of the speaking portion and listening to people from community in terms of protests and rallies, that could be something that I could consider as a potential option. And then when it came to the march and the actual sort of like walking, if that was a struggle for myself in that aspect, it would be okay for me to leave in that instance, due to my specific disability and health situation. But I think the one thing that I have seen probably a lot in my Instagram feed, funnily enough, is the way of activism in terms of looking at things that you can do in your own life, even sharing content, and like signing petitions or amplifying the voices of other people. That can also be really powerful because my thinking at least is if one person sees it, even that small thing is a positive for me. And in terms of protesting, again, that one is a tricky one because it really does depend on each individual person. But I have found in my work with Democracy in Colour, who is a racial justice organisation, when it comes to aspects of like planning events and stuff, that is something that I am able to assist in, and they have been really supportive of me and my access needs, and ways of sort of improving that. And if it is a situation where I am able to come along in person, we do generally like have a meeting point for people of the team to meet up. But yeah, they're more than happy to help in terms of that regard, and show up for me. And yeah, I guess this is a very long way of saying that ironically I've felt that the multicultural space has been more open in terms of supporting people in the disability community, and finding ways around activism, and showing solidarity. I have many thoughts on the disability community, because I find that if it's not an action around disability rights, then the disability community, which is very white, well, just call it what it is. Yeah, they just, in my experience, don't tend to show that same, extend that same sort of energy for other issues, which again, a whole other topic I could unpack, and I'm sure that you have thoughts on this, Ricki. But yeah, I've found that there are some ways around even donating and things like that. It's just still something I struggle with, and it's, I guess, a work in progress. But it really does depend on the person, and also dealing with health flare-ups and different things that come up. But there are definitely ways of showing up and showing solidarity and taking action.
I was really going to absolutely endorse and support what Husna has just said, because I think any project, any campaign that professes to be about empowerment and liberation has to have at the very heart of it an application of intersectionality as a framework. I think what Husna really highlighted, and what we hope can continue to be a message right throughout, is that if you don't understand the interlocking nature of discrimination and oppression, if you don't really understand how power and power disparity works based on these social constructions of human identity, then ironically, the very project that you claim is about social justice is going to keep reproducing and replicating the same barriers. So, from the very outset, the design of this program itself had to recognize that if you are genuinely about solidarity and coalition building, then you've got to take a look in first. You've got to look at how your own dynamics operate in this way. And I think that the politics of the disability movement, nothing about us without us, whether it's LGBTI, I think we're recognizing that we can't keep doing this coalition building in a way that reinforces our supposed single lives. I mean, the great Audre Lorde, a queer social justice activist, African American woman, once said, "We don't live our lives in single issue ways. We actually have to recognize how these aspects of human identity are deeply interlinked, and how they give rise to very unique expressions of discrimination and oppression." So I really think that what this project has done for us as well is recognise that in the very process of advocating for reconciliation with First Nations people, we have to realise that the only approach is an intersectional decolonial one that really recognises that reflective practice has got to be a key part of this process. We can't just focus on the outcome. We've got to look at the process, and we've got to be acutely aware of how we might, albeit unconsciously or inadvertently, but how we might inadvertently keep replicating those very barriers that we claim that we're committed to removing. So I just think, the queer, the disability, the gendered stuff, the racialized stuff, all of that had to be part and parcel of the way that we undertook this project.
Oh, thank you for that. Look, as we now, time has escaped us, and I want to go around for everyone's their final words for what the project Roads to Reconciliation, activating Multicultural Victoria project has meant to them, and also what we can do as a whole community right now going forward to make a change. I'll go over to you first, Andrew.
Thanks, Ricki. For a personal point of view, I've learned a lot and been really honoured to work with Maria, Shankar, and Jesse on this project. In the work I've done over 25 years, I have to acknowledge I haven't engaged as much as I should have with multicultural communities and reconciliation. So I've learned a lot, and that's been a real honour to be involved. Moving forward, I think one of the things we haven't sort of talked about in this discussion, which I think is really important to recognise, is the work of the Uluru Statement from the Heart. So if your viewers haven't read it, I really urge you to read it. It's just one page. Don't believe the lies of the No campaign. It was one page, and it's one of the most beautiful documents I've ever read. And it's an incredibly generous invitation from First Nations leaders to non-Indigenous peoples to walk with First Nations peoples on voice, truth, and treaty. And that's in place at the moment around the country. So one of the things in the despair of the referendum that gives me significant hope is the extraordinary work of First Nations leaders across Australia to look at ways to progress voice, treaty and truth. And that's really important. So as we're working in this space, the role of a project such as our project on engaging multicultural communities is incredibly important in looking at ways that multicultural communities can work and contribute towards addressing the Uluru Statement from the Heart and its commitments to voice, treaty and truth. So in Victoria, as we discussed briefly in this discussion, we are moving towards a treaty, which is really, really exciting. And we will have a treaty by 2026. And the negotiations are starting this year. And multicultural communities, as well as all non-Indigenous allies, we really have to be ensuring that we're strongly supporting this work of a treaty, which will make a transformational impact, not just for Indigenous Victorians, but for all Victorians. And that's one of the things I think got left out a bit with the campaign for the voice last year. A First Nations voice would have not have just benefited First Nations peoples, it would have benefited all of the country. So the role of projects such as these is going to be critical, not just in Victoria, but across Australia as we work towards voice, treaty and truth. So I'm really excited about that.
Maria?
I ditto to all of what Andrew has just said. The learning that has really emerged out of my involvement in this project has been extraordinary. What an incredible bunch of people that have been involved, and relationships and friendships that have been forged, I think, for forever, really. But the conversation has to continue. It is now more significant and important, in my view, than ever before, that as communities, as a nation, we confront the impact of colonisation, that we really do understand and support the process towards treaty in this country, but that we are able to reimagine what a nation, a truly reconciled nation with its first people, might look like. I think that the conversations that we've had, we can continue to build into the future. I think the point that Andrew made about rejecting that deficit driven conversation that's really dominated so much of our work around activism in this country, it's so much more powerful when we adopt a strength based approach, but at the same time, we're not afraid of having difficult, uncomfortable but respectful conversations, because we know that sometimes it does mean sitting with painful discomfort as non-Indigenous people while we reckon with the reality of what has happened over several centuries of colonisation on this land. But as I say, I'm extremely inspired by the work that's been undertaken, that continues to be undertaken, not only in Victoria, but across the land. Remarkable things can happen when we are engaged in deep listening to what First Nations leaders across this world are saying. The NAIDOC theme was keep the fires burning. I think the flames of social justice continue. Arundhati Roy, an Indian journalist and writer, once said, "We cannot unsee what has been seen. We can't keep justifying that we don't know. We can't keep saying we didn't know about this. There is now more information than ever before, and it's now incumbent on those of us in multicultural, non-Indigenous Australia to stop sticking our head in the sand, to put our hand up, to step forward, and to really take the hand that was so generously offered to us in the Uluru Statement and walk side by side in true solidarity in a authentic way."
That's lovely. Thank you, Maria. And it's now over to Hasna.
So just a couple things I just wanted to take from what Maria was saying around deficit-based lens and looking at, strength-based approaches instead, and also around, sitting with the discomfort. When you were making that statement, Maria, I was just reflecting on, the scenario that you were talking about with the fellow, and the acknowledgement at the evaluation stage around, kind of, getting away from that view of, oh, well, I'm not the problem, so, why should I? And I just reflect on a workplace that I have left who also, felt uncomfortable with basic intro 101 to anti-racism training, and discomfort is okay. Like, not everything is going to be peace and harmony, and I think to say, that it is and that we shouldn't feel uncomfortable is it almost makes me think of toxic positivity, I would say, and also, deficit-based ways of looking at things. I think, Ricki, you might be aware of this. It's something that has, historically been present within the disability space, particularly when we are being spoken for. And I think, we also need to do that in this space as well, when looking at reconciliation, when looking at the engagement between Indigenous communities and multicultural communities. But also, in relation to that, there is, a particular group that is, in my opinion, forgotten in that sort of lens, and that's the engagement of those from multicultural communities and those from First Nations communities who do have disabilities, who do have chronic illness, who are part of the LGBTIQ plus community, who are not being included in these conversations and don't have the opportunity, to share their experiences and their perspectives and to be involved in advocacy and activism. And I think it's really important to include those perspectives alongside others. And with this project, I feel really lucky that, I was able to explore, different ideas of how I wanted to, I guess, develop an event that, brought together different parts of my identity, but also, that also brought forward the experiences of those from First Nations communities who also have disabilities or chronic illness as well. And yeah, we don't have an excuse anymore in terms about like not knowing. I know that things are not perfect within the language translation space, but we do have those resources available, and I think for those communities who might be new arrivals, things like in language resources, I feel like could go a long way. And if all else fails, and I have done this when explaining other things to my parents, ChatGPT does a pretty good job at translating things into other languages, even dialectical variations. I can verify this because, again, I've used it to explain complex topics to my parents when I don't have the words to explain it to them. So
It's been an incredible journey. We've really explored quite a few issues that really highlight the importance of communities coming together, that is, multicultural communities coming together, working side by side with First Nations peoples to really address some of the underlying systemic structures of oppression that have been operating for so long. All I can say at the moment is for everybody who's listening out there is to really have a deep listen to what was said, rewatch it again, go to the links that we will provide for you, reach out, see what can I do, what can I give to the community, have those conversations with your family if whatever your language, your native language is, and speak and ask. And all we can do is let's untap our unconscious biases and really explore ways where we can connect together, because that if we get one cultural safety right, we can get this reconciliation right, we will create a society based on love and care, and that's all we can ask for. And for all my colleagues who work in schools who have been asking me for the last week, what can we do? You can do heaps. Talk to your principals, how can we support roads to reconciliation? What can we do? Projects, how can we support that? What can we do in our communities? Make contact. We will provide you the contact details, and have a conversation, Monday morning, whenever you see this, send an email to your principal and say, right, I want to do something as a school-wide project working with families to make change. Either you're in a regional space in Victoria, or even if you're in another state, let's get the ball rolling. Let's make this a national movement of care. Thank you so much, everyone, for my beautiful guests, Dr. Andrew Gunston, Maria Dimopoulos AM, and the lovely Hosna Mani, wonderful social worker to be and community activist. Thank you so much for spending some time with us on Quest by Community.